Good afternoon. This is a Devar Torah on Parshas Vayeira. It's the fourth parsha in Sefer Bereshit. When it opens, Avram is getting a Birka Kolim, a visit for the sick from God, because he had just had his bris milah 3 days ago, and Hashem made it. God made it very hot out, so no visitors would come, so Avram could heal. However, he was so disappointed that Hashem sent him three angels that appeared to be in the human form, and they told him, among other things, that that Sarah was going to get pregnant within a year. They'd have a child, should be named Yitzchak, and during preparing the meal for them, he found the cave of Machpelah, where Adam and Chava were buried, and where ultimately the three Avot and three of the four Imo were going to be buried. And the story then God tells Avram that he's planning to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Avram negotiates and saying, if there's 50 righteous people, you're going to kill them. No. 45, 40, 30, 10, 20, 10. So it's at least spare one or two of the cities. The angels go there. Their job was to take out Lot and the daughters. Then the cities are going to be destroyed for reasons I'll explain shortly. And after that, the parsha goes on with Sarah having a child, Ishmael being exiled with Hagar because of Yitzchak, and it goes on to him dealing with Avram dealing with the Plishtims, and finally Kadesh Yitzchak, where God commands Abraham to sacrifice his only son. Of course, at the last minute, he says, "Now I see you truly believe in me," and it's Yitzchak is not killed. In fact, there's a ram that's caught with its horns in a bush, which was one of the last things created just before the seventh first Shabbat. And the birth of Rivka is announced, among others. Now, what I'd like to focus on is the very strange story of Lot. Now, Lot was the nephew of Abraham, and since they were connected by blood and also in spiritual concepts, they shared certain spiritual qualities, one of which was chesed. Even though Lot used it in a misguided way, he still believed in chesed and was welcoming guests, and that will be important. Now, the question here is, so what happens in the story? Why was Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed in the first place? It's actually 5 cities. Why were they destroyed? Because they were given what was that point, it's now the Dead Sea, was the garden spot of the Middle East. They were going to have a great chance to welcome guests. And also, if they had done that, it could have been a tikkun, a correcting of things that had been done by earlier generations. Instead of doing that, they went down the wrong path, which ultimately led the Jews having to take the place and go into exile in Egypt. And the final thing that sealed their doom was a girl was discovered giving food to a traveler. There, the cities of Sodom and the other cities absolutely did everything possible to avoid having guests, and if they did have visitors, tortured them to death in various nasty ways. Now, one girl saw a traveler, and she gave him a piece of bread. The inhabitants caught her, They daubed her in honey and let the bee sting her to death. Her cries as she was dying went up to heaven, and that's when Hashem said, that's enough. They're going to seal the doom. The two to three angels that had come visit Avram went to Sodom, and the local inhabitants tried attacking them, thinking they were men. Now, first of all, what connections does this all have to Lot? First of all, the girl who was killed in that by the bees was none other than Plotit, who was one of the daughters of Lot, and showed this whole concept of chesed. Even at great risk to her life, she still wanted to do chesed, kindness, greeting guests, and she paid for that with her life. Now, the angels' missions were two, were to lead for the destruction of the city, but they had to get Lot, who was, as I said, a relative of Abraham, out of there. And they, so who did they have to evacuate? They had to evacuate Lot, his daughters. He didn't have any sons. And his wife, he had two unmarried daughters, and his wife, whose name was either Ivrit or Idit. Full explanation on that, beyond the scope of this Devar Torah. But in any event, they were listening. He went to try to get his married daughters out. His sons-in-law looked at him like he was a total fool and would not let their wives out. It's almost dawn when the destruction is supposed to occur. The angels take them, how to carry him out of the city with Lot and wife and two daughters. Now, his wife is a very complex individual. There's some very negative things about her. She wasn't there to serve the guests, who were actually the two angels. She was nowhere to be found. Actually, according to Midrash, where was she? She didn't like the idea of having guests. She took up the qualities of Sodom and Gomorrah and asked to borrow salt from all the neighbors. That's what indicated to that they were having guests. That led to the mob trying to kill, to capture and torture the two angels, but they didn't know they were angels. In any event, they're brought out of the city. However, Ivrit turns. They were told not to look back because none of them merited to be rescued in their own right, and therefore they shouldn't see the destruction that was occurring. She turned. Why? What was her possible motivation? Doesn't say in the Chumash, but it does in Midrashim, that she wanted to see her mother's concern and love, whether her two married daughters were going to escape, listen to their father this morning, and that's when she turned to salt. Now, Lot first asked that one city of the five be saved. He did briefly, but then the Shem decided that one had to be destroyed. They wound up in a cave in the top of a mountain. Now, this is where the story gets even more unusual. The two daughters thought that the human race had been wiped out, which was, of course, a fallacious assumption. So what did they do? They found some wine. The older one said, listen, we'll give her father wine. She was then going to, that night, have a child with him. And the next night, she suggested her younger sister did it. Now, one of them, the older sister, being quite brazen, called a Movi, the child of my father, and Movies. The other one said Ben Amon, which means the child of Moni, which means the child of our people. Now, very unusual. They were there with their father only once, yet they both had children, and these children were the beginning of two nations that were sworn enemies of Jewish people throughout history. And what's very interesting, you would think, why would, first of all, Hashem allow those two nations to get formed in the first place? And even more so, in last week's Parshas Lech Lecha, Hashem says to Avram, I'm going to give you 10 nations. Your descendants are going to have 10 nations. And the Israel is going to extend from the Nile to the Euphrates River, which is in modern days terms is around Baghdad. And they were known as the Kenites, the Kiznites, and the Kadmonites, yet we don't have those. We don't even have those today. We're only going to inherit those lands in the Zman of Mashiach, time of the final redemption. And who are those three lands? Amnon, Moab, and Edom. Now, Edom you can understand were the descendants of Esau, and he was a brother to Yaakov, so don't destroy them. But the other two, Amnon and Moab, they were sworn enemies. So why would they allowed to continue? And the reason that is given is that they were going to be very important people were going to descend from them, which I'll explain in a minute. And it was in the merit of these people that they were allowed, the nations were allowed to survive. Now, we have to look at Lot. Now I have to go back a bit to look at this as a deeper level. Why did these important descendants have to be anyway? One of which was Ruth the Moabite, and the other one was Naamah Ammoni. Why did they have to exist? What's their significance in history? And first of all, we have to understand that Lot, being one with Abraham, did a few things. First of all, he got some of the qualities of chesed, of kindness, as we saw in the story so far. And some of those have been shared by or inherited from Abraham. And also, I have to understand further, where did the Jewish people originate? Where did they come from? Now, spiritually, they inherited, one of the things they inherited, Adam had many different souls, potential, and one of those was a 600,000 part neshama that went to Avram and Sarah, and from which every single person, the Bnei Israel, descended. Now, what about Lot? Lot also received a lot of potential neshamas from Adam and Rishon. Now, in the case of Abraham and Sarah, even though they spiritually descended, as did Lot, physically they did not descend from them, as explained by Rav Yitzchak Chava in the Shad Mitzrayim Haggadah introduction. That because why? Avram and Sarai, as they originally were incapable of having children. It was only through a miracle, that they were able to have a child when Sarah was 90 and Avram was 100. Now, so therefore, all of those children, all of our descendants, were malam and teva. Physically, we don't exist according to normal rules of nature, teva, mazalim. So they only arose beyond that. That was not the case, and therefore they started producing the Jewish nation right away. Lot was a different story because he did not have that kind of neshama. The neshamas that descended from Lot were from the klipot. Now, to explain this in a bit of detail, when Adam Rishon committed a sin of eating the fruit, Eitz Hadas Tov and Ra, many potential neshamas that he carried, all the neshamas, sank into the klipot, the spiritual impurities. Now, when did these finally emerge? In the case of the nation of Moab, it was with Ruth. And she was the one who was able to escape from that impurity, and she became, her holy neshama became a convert, and she became, through a few generations, David HaMelech had, was a descendant of hers, and who was the Ammonite? Was Naamah. She was going to be the woman who married Shlomo Melech. He had many wives. What was her special significance? She was the she produced the next Davidic king after Shlomo Melech, Solomon. Now, so that explains why these nations, on one level, had to be reserved, so that these holy neshamas could come out, these souls, these people. Now, a further question, and this was based on Likutei Torah, a further question is, why were they needed? We already had this holy neshama from Abraham and Sarah. Why do we need this additional quality? Because in the long final exile, the Ramchal explains, which has been going on for almost 2,000 years. Hopefully, it's going to come to our end very soon, speedily in our days, but it didn't. And the exile has been so long that even the promise of Mashiach, the two Mashiachs, having Mashiach ben Ephraim, Mashiach ben David, was not enough to keep the people, the Bnei Israel, going. So extra sparks of Kedusha, extra neshamas, and chesed, which is one of our greatest qualities, had to be added so that we could survive the long night of exile, which is hopefully coming to an end now. Now, so that explains why they were needed, and it was from Lot not only descended these poor neshamas that became souls that became the Davidic dynasty, and because of that, all of the descendants of David, his family, David HaMelech, until the Zman of Mashiach, have to fight their way out of the klipot, so they're born into very impure places. I'll explain it another time as we go through further parshas, Yehuda and Tamar, and even the whole way that Ruth got redeemed in itself was very unusual. And by Boaz. But here, there is one other, for example, it's, and this was in Parshas Lech Lecha, we see something a little unusual here. It says, this is when the four kings were raiding Sodom and Gomorrah and took Lot, and it says Yikhu et Lot ve'et Rakush ben Achi Abraham bi'iklu, and they left. Now, normal way you would say it, that's not the normal way you would say it. What would be more normal way to say it was that they took Lot, who was the brother of Abraham, and his wealth. Why the strange order? But what do we write? V'yichach et Lot ve'et Rakush ben Achi Abraham. We say we took Lot and his wealth, and oh, by the way, he was the son of the brother of Avram, in other words, his nephew. Why the strange order? And he explained that if you look at the letters there, Rakush ben Achi, the first letters in the Hebrew alphabet are Resh, Bet, and Aleph in Hebrew. Now that spells the name of Rabbah, who was one of the great Amoras, authors of the Babylonian Talmud, and the Chavrusa of Reish Lakish, another great Rav, who interestingly enough was a Rasha who turned good. And we see that Hashem's plans are very deep. We can often not see the deeper meanings of it, but they're multi-generational. May we finally see the final Gula and reach the potential that Ruth and Nama helped create. Good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.